My daughter-in-law stood in my doorway, arms folded, and said, "You're lucky we even let you live here." Behind her, my son leaned against the wall, the same wall he painted with my money, avoiding my eyes. For a moment, all I could hear was the ticking of the hallway clock and the faint hum of the dishwasher. The house I built, the one my husband and I paid off penny by penny, suddenly felt foreign, like I was trespassing inside my own life. I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, holding a stack of folded towels that smelled of lavender and loneliness. They were her towels once, gifts from a Christmas she no longer remembered. I wanted to ask what she meant by "let you," but the answer already lived in her smirk. They didn't see me as family anymore, just a tolerated presence, an obligation with grey hair. "My name is Eleanor Hayes, 65 years old, widow, retired librarian. This house is the last thing my late husband Robert and I built together. He laid the porch himself, whistling between hammer strikes. I planted rose bushes by the fence he promised to repaint and never did. Every inch of this place is threaded with memory, our laughter, our arguments, our life. And now, apparently, my son and his wife believe it belongs to them. When Robert died 8 years ago, Daniel, our only child, moved back home for a little while. He said he didn't want me to be alone. I remember crying from gratitude. He was 32 then, newly married to Melissa, who smiled too politely and called me Eleanor instead of Mum. They brought their boxes, their furniture, their new vocabulary of control. "You don't need to worry about bills. We'll handle the maintenance. It's better if everything's under one account." Back then, I believed love could be measured in help, that letting them handle things was a kindness, that surrender was a softer version of trust. I didn't notice when the mail started arriving in their names, or when Robert's tools disappeared from the shed, or when my name, my handwriting, began to vanish from every bill, every envelope. Now Melissa stood in front of me like a landlord collecting rent. "Daniel and I talked," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, voice smooth as silk, hiding a blade. "We think it's time you consider other options. Maybe a senior place. You'd have your own space there." My son didn't interrupt. He didn't even flinch. He just stared at the floor, the same way he used to when he broke a window as a boy and waited for his father to fix it. "Other options?" I asked quietly. "You mean leave my home?" She shrugged. "We're just trying to make things comfortable. For everyone. Comfortable." The word tasted like chalk. I wanted to remind her whose signature sat on the deed, whose overtime shifts kept the lights on when Daniel was still in school. I wanted to remind him who held his fevered head when he was 8, who sold her wedding bangles to pay his college tuition. But the words wouldn't come. Not out of fear, out of shock. Because betrayal doesn't sound like shouting. It sounds like concern. She gave a tight smile, the kind people wear when they've already decided what's best for you. "Anyway, we'll talk more tonight. Don't stress yourself, okay?" And just like that, she walked away, heels clicking across the hardwood. Robert laid with his own hands, leaving me in the doorway with my folded towels and my folded dignity. Daniel lingered for a second longer. He opened his mouth, then closed it. "Mum," he finally said. "Melissa didn't mean it like that." "I know exactly how she meant it," I replied. He exhaled through his nose, that familiar teenage frustration resurfacing. "We're doing our best here. Things are tight. Just be grateful you're still with us." Be grateful. The same phrase my father once used on my mother when she dared to ask why he drank away the rent. I'd spent a lifetime escaping that tone, only to hear it echoed by my own blood. After they left, I sank into Robert's old chair, the one she'd wanted to replace with something modern. The window light spilled across the rug, catching in the dust I hadn't noticed before. I looked around at the photos on the mantel. Robert in his uniform, Daniel at 10 holding a fishing pole, Melissa at their wedding with her painted-on joy. Each frame felt like evidence in a trial I hadn't realized was happening. For years, I'd told myself I was lucky to have family, lucky to have a roof, lucky to still be needed. But luck is just another word for control when someone else defines it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Melissa's voice echoing down the hall. "You're lucky we even let you live here." Each time it sounded less like a sentence and more like a verdict. I got out of bed around midnight, padded softly to the study, and pulled open the bottom drawer of the old oak desk. Inside lay a worn manila folder labeled Deed Titles. My name, Eleanor M. Hayes, printed in fading ink. I traced the letters with my thumb and whispered, "Let me? You live here because I let you." Outside, the wind rattled the windows, as if Robert himself was reminding me whose house this truly was. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel helpless. I felt awake. Sleep didn't visit that night. It hovered, distant, like a friend who no longer knew the way to my door. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, staring at the deed under the dull light of the stove lamp. The paper looked fragile, almost translucent at the edges. But my name, my claim, was still there. That name was the one thing life had never taken from me. Not after Robert's death, not after the layoffs at the library, not even after Daniel started calling less and less. My name had survived everything until my own child started speaking like he owned it. As the first light bled through the blinds, I thought of Robert. He was a quiet man, stubborn in the way good men are. He used to say, "This house isn't walls, Ellie. It's proof. Proof that we worked, we stayed, and we didn't quit. We built this place with scraped knuckles and second-hand hope. Every board carried the rhythm of our effort. Every creak in the floor was a memory humming." Now the same house had been scrubbed of us. Melissa's decor erased warmth and replaced it with white walls and aesthetic neutrality. Even the curtains smelled different store-bought vanilla, not the faint lemon scent of my homemade cleaner. I didn't just lose space. I lost evidence that I'd lived here. When Robert died, Daniel was 32 still. That boy who used to call every Sunday just to ask, "Mum, how's the garden?" I remember sitting at the funeral, his hand trembling in mine. "Don't worry," he'd whispered. "I'll take care of you." I believed him. I wanted to. The house felt too big for one person then, and grief has a way of making even betrayal sound like help. They moved in 3 months later, Daniel and Melissa with their boxes, their big plans, their quiet reorganization of my life. At first, it felt like companionship. Melissa would make dinner sometimes. Daniel would mow the lawn. They smiled. They asked if I was okay. And I mistook those check-ins for love. Then the help began to multiply. "Let's put the bills under one account. Mum easier for tax season. You shouldn't worry about groceries. We'll handle the lists. Your doctor said less stress, remember? Let us manage the finances." Each offer came wrapped in care but tied with control. They'd hand me documents, smiling, saying, "Just sign here." I did, because I trusted, because it felt good to be cared for, because love had always meant saying yes. Some nights, I'd hear them whispering behind closed doors, conversations that stopped the moment I entered the room. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things, that paranoia was a sign of aging. But now I see it was something else entirely. Preparation. The first real wound came a year after they moved in. I'd gone to pay the property tax at the bank, only to be told, "It's already covered, ma'am. Your son's name is on the account." "My son's name?" I'd repeated, smiling awkwardly as the teller nodded. I laughed it off, pretended I understood. But when I came home and asked Daniel, his reply was simple. "Yeah, Mum. We added me for convenience. You're getting older." For convenience. It was the same tone people use when they take your car keys. For your safety. You want to argue, but the word safety makes you feel childish. I started noticing other changes. subtle but sure. The spare room that used to hold Robert's books became Melissa's home office. My framed wedding photo was quietly moved to the hallway for better flow. My old cedar chest disappeared from the foot of the bed. She said she donated it. It was taking up space. One night, I found her using my mother's china set for dinner, the one I'd kept boxed for decades, only opening on anniversaries. She laughed when I gasped. "Oh, come on, Eleanor. Things are meant to be used, not hoarded." That was when I realized she didn't see history, she saw inventory. Over time, Daniel changed too. The softness in his voice dulled. He started calling me Mum only when Melissa was around, as if it were part of a performance. Alone, he'd talk like a man delivering news he didn't want to share. "You know we're just trying to help you," he'd say over and over, until help began to sound like a verdict. I learned to stay quiet, to keep the peace, to swallow indignity like vitamins daily, obediently, hoping they'd keep me alive. But silence has a weight, and mine was starting to crush me. That morning after her remark, I watched them eat breakfast in the kitchen. Melissa in her silk robe, Daniel scrolling on his phone. They didn't look at me. They spoke around me. The conversation was about mortgage rates, property values, our house. The words felt like bricks sealing a wall between us. When Melissa finished her coffee, she smiled. "Oh, Eleanor, could you tidy the living room before the real estate agent stops by later? We're just getting a valuation. Nothing to worry about." A valuation. She said it like it was casual, but my stomach turned cold. I'd seen that word enough times in the mail to know what it really meant. They were testing the price of my life's work. When they left, I went to the living room window. The morning light hit the roses by the fence, the same ones Robert planted in spring, '88. I thought of his words again. This house isn't walls. It's proof. Proof of what? I wondered. Endurance or foolishness. The air felt different, not just heavy, decisive. Something in me shifted that morning. It wasn't rage yet. Rage is loud and wasteful. This was something quieter, something older. A calm that only comes when you realize what's being stolen isn't just property, it's legacy. And legacy, I decided, was the one thing they would never take without a fight. The next morning, I waited until they were both in the kitchen. Melissa was at the counter, tapping on her phone, her coffee steaming beside her. Daniel sat at the table, still half asleep, muttering about emails. I placed the property tax envelope right in front of him. "Daniel," I said quietly, "why does this list your name before mine?" He blinked, slow, confused at first, then careful. "Oh, that. Just administrative, Mum. The county's been updating ownership records. Nothing to worry about." "Ownership records," I repeated, each word deliberate. "You mean the records that determine who owns this house?" He gave a light laugh, the kind people use when they think you're being dramatic. "Mum, please, you're overthinking again." "Again?" I said. The words scraped. Like when I overthought the bills, or when I overthought my own credit card disappearing. Melissa's eyes flicked up from her phone just once, sharp and precise. "You really should relax, Eleanor. It's not good for your blood pressure." That tone, polite cruelty wrapped in medical concern. I'd heard it before, from hospital administrators trying to silence grieving families. The same rhythm, the same condescension disguised as care. "I'm quite calm," I said. "I'd just like to understand why my house is being valued by a realtor without my consent." The silence that followed was immediate, tight. Daniel froze mid-sip, the mug trembling slightly. Melissa smiled. "You really shouldn't eavesdrop on things you don't understand. It's stressful for you." Something inside me snapped not like glass, but like thread finally pulling free. "I understand perfectly," I said. "You're getting ready to sell." Daniel stood up then, rubbing his temples. "Mum, stop. We're not selling anything without talking to you first." "You already are talking to me," I said, voice steady. and I'm telling you this house isn't for sale." Melissa sighed, setting her phone down with an exaggerated patience. "Eleanor, we're trying to plan ahead. You can't live here forever. You're getting older. The stairs are dangerous. We could get you somewhere better, smaller, more manageable, somewhere safe." Safe. There it was again, that word people use when they're about to cage you. "Safe," I repeated. "For me, or for your mortgage application?" Her smile vanished. Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not fair, Mom." "No," I said. "It's not." I turned to him fully then, searching for the boy I once knew, the one who used to run barefoot across this kitchen floor, who once told me, "When I grow up, I'll buy you a house on a hill." Now that same boy was standing in the one I built, treating me like an inconvenience to be relocated. "Do you even hear how you sound?" I asked softly. "You talk to me like I'm an obstacle, like I'm something you have to move out of the way." His face softened just for a moment. Guilt flickered there, fragile, human. Then Melissa spoke, and it vanished. "Eleanor," she said, arms folded, "you're not being reasonable. We're offering you options. You should be grateful we're not just putting you in some care facility." Grateful. The same word again, that cold currency of control. "I see," I said quietly. "So that's my place now? To be grateful that I'm allowed to exist in what I built?" Melissa rolled her eyes. "You're twisting everything." "No," I said. "I'm just finally hearing it clearly." Daniel exhaled sharply. "You know what? Maybe we need a break from this conversation. You're clearly upset." "Not upset," I said. "Awake." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," I replied, "I've been too polite for too long." I picked up the deed from the table and held it up. "This house, this address, was signed into being by your father and me. His sweat, my labor. My name is still printed right here. You don't get to erase it because it's inconvenient." He stared at the paper like it was something radioactive. Melissa crossed her arms tighter, her voice suddenly soft, too soft. "You can't do this alone, Eleanor. You need us." I met her eyes. "No, you need me, and that's what terrifies you." The air went still. For a moment, even the refrigerator hum seemed to pause. Then, Daniel muttered, "You're tired, Mum. Let's drop it for now." He turned to leave. "Daniel," I said, and he stopped. "You once told me I was your home. Remember that?" He didn't answer, just nodded once, eyes low, and walked away. Melissa lingered in the doorway, her perfume sharp in the air. "You can't fight this forever," she said quietly. I smiled faintly. Forever starts small. When the door shut behind her, the silence felt different this time, not empty, but electric. I sat down at the table again, the deed still warm in my hand. The same hand that once soothed fevers, signed checks, held Robert's as he took his last breath. That hand had built this life, and that hand could still reclaim it. I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out my old leather notebook, the one I used for grocery lists and garden notes. On a clean page, I wrote 3 words in neat, deliberate ink. "Find a way back." Then I underlined it. Twice. Because I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for proof that I still existed and that I could not be erased quietly. The next week passed in uneasy silence. Melissa's voice turned saccharine again. Her greetings too bright, her footsteps too light. Daniel avoided me altogether, slipping out early, coming home late. That's how people act when they've already made decisions about you. They stop looking at you because guilt hates eye contact. I told myself to stay calm. I cooked, I cleaned, I pruned the roses, pretending life was ordinary. But something about the air in that house had changed. The rhythm was off. They'd stopped pretending to include me. Then, on Friday morning, I heard the printer in Daniel's office humming before dawn. That wasn't normal. I stood at the top of the stairs, still in my robe, listening. 2 voices, low, hurried, muffled. "She doesn't need to know yet," Melissa whispered. Daniel sighed. She's going to find out eventually. Not if we handle it fast. The buyer's ready to move. We just need signatures. Buyer. The word rooted me in place. My heart thudded so hard, it felt like the railing might rattle with it. Buyer. Of what? I didn't need to ask. I already knew. I stepped back quietly before they noticed me. My hands shook, but not from fear, from the realization that every suspicion had been mercy. The truth was worse. They weren't planning to sell the house eventually. They were selling it now. Later that afternoon, I walked into the kitchen as though nothing had happened. Melissa sat at the counter, typing on her laptop. I poured myself tea, deliberately slow, letting the sound fill the silence. "How was your morning?" I asked. "Busy," she said. "Meetings, calls, you know." I smiled faintly. "With the realtor." Her hands froze above the keyboard, just for a second. A flicker, but I caught it. "Excuse me?" she said, the word smooth but stretched. I turned to face her fully. "The realtor, the one you're working with to sell my house." Her lips parted, then pressed into a line. "Eleanor, I think you're misunderstanding something." "No," I said. "Not this time." Daniel walked in then, mid-conversation on his phone, but stopped when he saw my face. "What's going on?" I held up the cup of tea like a prop in a performance I didn't audition for. "Melissa was just explaining how you plan to sell the house out from under me." His face went pale. "Who told you that?" "You did," I said. "This morning. The walls heard you." He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my gaze. "It's complicated, Mum. You don't understand how the finances work." "Then explain them," I said sharply. Melissa stood, posture perfect, like she was addressing a patient instead of a person. "Eleanor, we're not stealing from you. We're just making things easier. You can't keep up with the upkeep, the taxes, the repairs. We found a buyer who's willing to let you stay temporarily while we transition you somewhere nicer." Transition. Another careful bureaucratic cruelty. "You mean move me out?" I said. "Don't dramatize," she replied. "You'll have your own space. It'll be peaceful." Peaceful, the word they use when they're done pretending to love you. I set the teacup down so slowly it didn't even clink. "Tell me something," I said. "Whose name is on the listing?" Melissa hesitated, then glanced at Daniel. That was answer enough. "Yours," I said. "Because you made sure of it." Daniel's voice cracked. "We were just trying to make things secure, Mum. You didn't want to deal with legal stuff after Dad died. We handled everything for you. Remember?" "I remember," I said. "You slid the papers under my coffee cup one Christmas and told me it was insurance. I signed because I trusted you." Silence. Only the sound of my own breathing, ragged and low. "I should have read it," I whispered. Melissa crossed her arms. "You gave permission. It's too late to act like you didn't." There it was. Not guilt, not apology. Ownership. Something in me hardened right then. A slow, deliberate calcification. The kind that happens to people who've been underestimated too long. I looked at both of them and smiled. Small, steady, unsettling. "You're right," I said softly. "It is too late." Daniel blinked. "What?" I took a sip of my tea, now cold. "Too late for me to keep pretending you're the children I raised." The look on Melissa's face cracked for the first time. Not with fear, but confusion. People like her never see the moment their victim becomes their rival. That night, I went to bed with the deed still in my drawer. I couldn't sleep. So I opened the laptop Robert used to balance bills on. It took forever to boot. But when it did, my fingers moved like muscle memory checking old emails, accounts, passwords. Searching for proof that this house, this life, still belonged to me. And then I found it. An email from the county property office unread, dated 6 months ago. Subject line: Notice of ownership change request. The sender: Melissa Graham Hayes. The attachment: A scanned joint ownership agreement bearing my signature forged perfectly except for one thing. They'd spelled my middle name wrong, Marie instead of Maria. A clerical miracle, their carelessness, my salvation. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the screen reflecting on my hands. Robert used to say, "Details save you." He was right. I printed the document, slid it under the deed in my drawer, and locked it. Then I whispered, to the quiet air of the house that was finally listening again. They wanted to sell my home. A pause. But I think I'll sell theirs first. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. For the first time in years, my body moved with purpose instead of habit. I brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead, sat by the kitchen table, and opened my old notebook, the same one where Robert and I once scribbled grocery lists and mortgage plans. On a clean page, I wrote one sentence in firm, deliberate strokes. Take back what's mine. It didn't sound like vengeance. It sounded like math, simple, necessary, balanced. I spent the morning collecting the papers they thought I'd forgotten. Receipts, letters, old tax filings, even the house insurance from the year Robert died. I arranged them into neat stacks across the table, like I was piecing together a crime scene because that's what it was. A slow, polite theft written in signatures and silence. Around mid-morning, I called Janine, an old friend from my library days. We hadn't spoken in months, but she'd once told me, "If you ever smell trouble, call me before you drown in it." She answered on the second ring. "Eleanor Hayes," she said, voice brisk as ever. "Tell me you're not calling about book club drama." "Worse," I said. "It's family." A long exhale. "Oh dear. What did they take?" "Everything they think I won't notice." She was silent for a moment. Then her tone changed the kind of quiet seriousness people use when they stop pretending. "All right. Start from the beginning." I told her about the forged form, the realtor, the whispered conversations. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, "You still have the original deed?" "Yes." "Then you still have leverage. Listen to me carefully, Eleanor, don't confront them again. Not yet. We'll handle this legally, not emotionally." "Janine," I said, "I've been emotional for years. I think I'm finally done." She chuckled softly. "Good. Because what we're about to do requires precision." That afternoon, I met her downtown at a small cafe tucked between an antique shop and a florist. She arrived with a stack of papers and a pen that looked more like a weapon. "I know a real estate lawyer," she said. "Her name's Cora Patel. She's sharp, discreet, and hates bullies. I told her about your situation. She wants to help." I hesitated. "Can I afford that kind of help?" Janine leaned forward. "You can't afford not to." She was right. So we met Cora later that day. She was in her 40s, confident, her hair pinned in a perfect bun. She listened without judgment as I explained everything. The deed, the signatures, the manipulation. When I showed her the forged form, she whistled softly. "They got sloppy," she said. "That's going to cost them." Her words were clean, professional, but the glint in her eyes told me she took cases like this personally. "We'll start by freezing any pending transactions. I'll file a notice of contested ownership. That means no sale can proceed without your explicit consent." "And they'll know?" I asked. "Oh, they'll know," she said, "but not until it's already done." That night, I came home feeling lighter, not because the problem was gone, but because I finally had a map. Melissa and Daniel were watching TV, pretending to be normal. I smiled as I walked past them. "Long day?" I asked. Daniel nodded absently. Melissa glanced at me, suspicion flickering. "Where were you?" "Book club," I said, keeping my tone light. "We're reading about women who outlive their mistakes." She laughed nervously, not sure if it was a joke. I didn't clarify. Over the next few days, I followed Cora's instructions to the letter. I rerouted my pension deposits to a separate account under my maiden name. I contacted the utilities and quietly changed the mailing address to my lawyer's office. I gathered every document that still bore my name titles, insurance forms, even old letters from Robert, and stored them in a fireproof box under the bed. Every small step felt like oxygen. Meanwhile, I played my role perfectly. I made breakfast, smiled at Melissa's fake politeness, listened when Daniel talked about future investments. They thought the calm meant surrender. It didn't. It meant strategy. 3 nights later, I overheard Melissa again, this time on the phone. Her voice was low but sharp. "I don't care about her feelings, Jeff. The house sells or we're drowning. Just finalize the papers." Jeff. I didn't know a Jeff, but I made a note of the name in my notebook and circled it twice. The next day, I asked Cora to run a quick check. By evening, she called back. "Jeffrey Lane," she said. "Local realtor. Works with cash buyers. Your daughter-in-law's been emailing him for months." I felt a strange calmness settle over me. "Can we stop the sale?" "Already did," she said. "And I filed the fraud claim this morning. You'll get the confirmation tomorrow." "Thank you," I whispered. Cora paused. "Eleanor, I've seen this before, families who think kindness means consent. You're not powerless. You're just finally awake." When I hung up, I stood in the middle of my living room, the room they'd tried to redesign into something unrecognizable, and realized something simple and terrifying. For years, I'd believed my silence was love, but it was permission. And now, permission had expired. I walked to the window and looked out at Robert's roses glowing under the porch light. "We're fixing it," I whispered. The breeze outside stirred like an answer. That night, I slept for the first time in weeks, deeply, peacefully knowing that by morning, every move I made would bring me one step closer to justice. And maybe, just maybe, by the time they realized what I'd done, it would already be too late. It started quietly, the kind of quiet that means power has changed hands. By the following Tuesday, Cora had filed every piece of paperwork necessary to block the sale. The county records now listed the property under contested ownership. That single stamp froze everything. No realtor, no buyer, no whispered deal could move forward without my consent. Melissa didn't know yet. That was the beautiful part. For the first time in years, I had knowledge they didn't, and I let that secret sit in my chest like a second heartbeat. On Wednesday morning, I watched them from the kitchen window. They stood on the porch, talking to a man in a suit. Jeff, no doubt. His slick hair and fake smile screamed of someone who'd never worked an honest day in his life. Melissa was laughing too loudly. Daniel looked uneasy. Papers changed hands. Pens clicked. I sipped my tea and smiled. When they came inside, Melissa called out, "Eleanor, you'll never guess the realtor says we could get almost double what we expected." I turned slowly, keeping my voice steady. "That's nice, dear. But you might want to tell him to hold off." She frowned. "Why?" "Oh, I don't know," I said. "Maybe because selling someone else's house without their consent is considered fraud." Her face went pale so fast it was almost theatrical. "What are you talking about?" Daniel stepped in. "Mum, please don't start." "No, you don't start," I said, setting my cup down hard enough to make it rattle. "I know about the forged form, the emails, the fake joint ownership request. The county knows too. So do the lawyers." The silence that followed was magnificent. Melissa's voice cracked first. You hired a lawyer?" "I hired 3, I said flatly. "And a friend who knows how to make sure your names stay in every official record of this mess." Daniel's mouth opened, then closed again. His face was red, not from guilt, but fear. "Mum, you didn't have to do that." "I did," I said, "because I finally learned that love doesn't mean letting people walk over you." Melissa took a step forward, trembling, trying to regain her footing. "You can't just undo everything. The accounts, the money, already transferred," I interrupted. "Every joint account is now closed. Every bill is redirected. Every document has been refiled under my maiden name. You're no longer listed anywhere. Her voice rose, brittle and shrill. You can't do that. We live here. I smiled, calm and terrifying. Not for long. Daniel looked at me like I'd grown a second head. What does that mean? It means, I said, that I've decided to sell the house myself. Melissa blinked. You're lying. No, I said. You are. You lied when you said you were protecting me. You lied when you said it was temporary. And now, you get to live with what you taught me. I pulled a folded paper from my cardigan pocket and placed it on the counter. It was the official sale listing, signed by me, authorized by Cora. The house was going up for sale not under their names, but mine alone. Daniel stepped closer, his voice low, pleading. Mum, please, don't do this. You already did, I said. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The kitchen filled with the sound of the clock ticking steady, relentless. Melissa's eyes darted to Daniel, searching for help that wasn't coming. Finally, she whispered, You wouldn't survive out there on your own. I met her gaze, unflinching. I survived war, widowhood, and raising a child who forgot who paid for his first pair of shoes. I'll manage. She turned away, muttering curses under her breath. Daniel stood frozen, his face a portrait of quiet collapse. I don't want this to get ugly, he said weakly. It already is, I said. I'm just done pretending it isn't. When they left the room, slamming the door behind them, I sat down at the table, the same one where I used to help Daniel with his homework. I looked around the kitchen, at the chipped mug Robert loved, the soft hum of the fridge, the smell of lemon cleaner. This was what I was fighting for. Not bricks and beams, but proof that I still existed, that I still had power, that I wasn't just something to be managed. That evening, I signed the final authorization with Cora over the phone. The house was listed by morning, not to cash buyers or developers, but to families, people who might actually see the place the way Robert once did. A beginning, not a burden. 2 days later, Melissa found the notice in the mailbox. Her voice echoed through the house like an alarm. You sold it? I am selling it, I corrected. You said you wanted a fresh start. Congratulations, you'll have one. She looked at me like she couldn't decide whether to scream or cry. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, but at least it'll be my regret. When they stormed out, Daniel's eyes lingered on me for a moment longer. There was something like recognition there, or maybe shame, but I didn't need either. I poured myself another cup of tea, calm and deliberate, and sat by the window watching the evening light spill across the rose bushes. For the first time in years, I felt the house breathing with me again, not against me. Robert once told me that dignity isn't loud, it's steady. And as the sun dipped behind the roof, I realized he was right. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just signs its name neatly in blue ink and waits for the wind to carry the news. When they left, the house fell silent. Not the cold, punishing silence of resentment, but the kind that comes after a storm finally breaks. I sat in the living room surrounded by boxes, breathing in the stillness. For the first time in years, the air felt mine again. They moved out in haste, their anger echoing down the hall. Daniel tried one last time, standing in the doorway, eyes wet. You didn't have to do this, Mum. I looked up from the table where the deed lay signed in my name. No, I said, but you made sure I had to. Days later, the investigator confirmed it, their forged documents, the illegal transfer attempts, everything. The sale they'd planned was dead. My house, my name, restored. Yet I realized I didn't want to keep it. Some places hold too much history to stay soft. So I sold it myself legally, quietly, on my own terms to a young couple who saw it not as property, but as home. When I handed them the keys, I told them, treat her kindly. She's been through enough. Now I live in a small cottage near the edge of town. The walls creak, The floor tilts, and every imperfection feels like truth. I wake to sunlight instead of tension. I pay my own bills. I choose my own quiet. Daniel called once. He said he was sorry. I told him forgiveness isn't a gift, it's a boundary. We spoke kindly, but I hung up, knowing I didn't owe him anything more. Sometimes, when I sip my tea by the window, I remember Melissa's words. You're lucky we even let you live here. And I almost smile, because now I know. Luck had nothing to do with it. I wasn't lucky. I was rightful. And I finally started living like it.